All right, a couple of things I'm going to give you. People probably will still be coming in, but I'm going to give you notes so that you don't have to take notes. Hold these up and keep them. I would like to speak with you this morning. But then, yeah, should be. Yeah, should be. Oh, thank you. And I'll tell you what, Brother Cubas, just kind of keep this for your own. All right, let's pray together, and I want to ask. Let's just have a word of prayer, and then we'll get going this morning. Thank you for coming to the conference. Already been a great conference, worth the trip. Just for last night's message on identity, and man, that was tremendous. Appreciate Brother Paulie, Brother Jake did a great job this morning, and looking forward to today. Father, we love you, and thank you for these folks that have come, and Lord, just pray for a few moments that we can take what you've given us through the Apostle Paul there in Philippians, where he says those things that have happened unto us have happened for the furtherance of the gospel, and those things that we go through, Lord, those things are the great lessons of life that we can now take and see you in the valley, and what Brother Paulie said on Sunday, in the midst of our trial. And now we see what you've done in our life. May we encourage and help others in their trial. And Lord, I pray you bless it now in Jesus' name. Amen. Find Matthew, if you would. Matthew chapter 1. And I want you to go down to verse number 18. Matthew chapter number 1, and look at verse number 18. Appreciate Tyrone Boulevard Chick-fil-A providing the Chick-fil-A and the sausage this morning. That was awesome. I want you to look at verse number, so let's start at verse number 18. Matthew chapter 1, verse number 18. Now the birth of Jesus Christ was on this wise. The birth of Jesus Christ was on this wise. All right, so I know it's early, and I know we're exhausted, so I'm going to ask easy questions. How many of you would agree with the Word of God and with us that Jesus Christ turned out pretty good? Simple no-brainer, right? All right, he's the Son of God. I mean, he is deity incarnate. He is God in the flesh. Emmanuel, God with us. So when you look at verse 18 and you find that Jesus Christ comes into the world to identify with man, to bear the sin of man, to take our sin to the cross, to pay our punishment, to do all those things, you say, wow, that's awesome. I mean, Jesus Christ, this is great. But if you look at Matthew 1, and so many of us, we kind of skip Matthew 1 because there's a lot of begetting going on, right? And so beget so-and-so, and so, and you're like, man, that's just name after name after name. But I want you to look at 4 specific, and we could look at probably 10, but I want you to look at 4 specific names this morning. And I want you to go back in Matthew 1, and I want you to look at verse number 3. Verse number 3, Matthew 1. Judas begat Pharez and Zerah of Tamar. Pharez begat Esrom, Esrom begat Aram. All right, go down to verse number 5. Salmon begat Boaz of Rahab. Of Boaz begat Obed of Ruth, and Obed begat Jesse. Go to verse 6. Jesse begat David the king, and David the king begat Solomon of her that had been the wife of Uriah. I want to talk to you this morning about one family. You can pick your friends, you can pick your friend's nose, but you can't pick your family. I've heard that before. Your family is what you're born into. Your family is mom and dad, or mom and stepdad, or mom and stepmom, or whatever it is. It may be grandma, maybe grandpa, maybe aunt, maybe uncle, maybe adoptive parents. It may be a lot of things, but it's your family. It's who you are. So let me tell you quickly my story, just so you'll know. I was raised in a preacher's home. My dad was in full-time ministry my whole life. And when I was 18 years old, I went off to play college football. And I played football up in Maranatha Baptist Bible College, Watertown, Wisconsin. Literally the coldest place in the history of the world. And one day I'm getting on a bus to go play a game in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I got a letter from my mom that said, "Dear Brent," big thick letter, said, "Dear Brent, just letting you know that when you come home, things are going to be different. I've left your father." That's a little bit different. And she explained why she left and so on and so forth. So at 18, my mom left my dad. Now, let me reverse a little bit. My dad was raised in a drunkard's home. My grandpa is Oscar Stancil. Now, Oscar Stancil died when I was a baby. In fact, I never met him. I was a newborn, and he died a drunkard's death, and that's the cirrhosis of the liver. And just he was really a good-looking man. That's where I get that from. But he was an American Indian. Have a lot of American Indian on both sides of my family. But he was a womanizer. He was an alcoholic. He was an abuser. In fact, my granny used to tell the story that finally she had all she could handle of it. And one night he'd come home drunk and hitting on her. And she waited till he passed out. And she took a cast iron frying pan to him. Now, if you know some of you ladies need to learn what a frying pan is. But cast iron frying pan, that is a heavy, heavy duty frying pan. And she wore him out. That's the last time he ever beat on her, because she beat him to death in that drunken. Didn't kill him, but he thought he was going to die. Well, he died a drunkard's death. So that's my daddy's side of the family. My daddy was on his own at 14. A couple of years ago, my daddy called me on the phone, one of the great moments of my life. And he called me and said, "Brent, I want to apologize to you for the kind of daddy I was." Now, my daddy's in full-time ministry, loves the Lord. He said, "I didn't know how to be a daddy." And he didn't know how to be a daddy. He was raised by a drunkard. My granny, after she left my grandpa Oscar, we stopped counting at 5 marriages. We just started filling in the blank of whoever she would come up with next. So I'm just saying, my daddy didn't have any role model of parenting, and so he didn't understand some things like, how to discipline correctly. I can tell you some stories there. I won't bother you with that. But let's say you've never been spanked until you've been spanked by my daddy, because it wasn't technically a spanking. We would probably label it today more like child abuse, amen, right there. But my daddy's family didn't give him any foundation. So he raised us as best he could. He called me on the phone. He said, "Brent, I'm sorry." He said, "I didn't know how to be a daddy." He said, I was a terrible daddy. He said, "But I'm going to be a good grandpa because I've learned how to be better, and I've learned." And it was just a good day for him to talk to me like that. Now, slip over to my mom's side of the family. My mom's side of the family, a little bit different. My grandfather on her side died in World War II. She was a 2-year-old baby, never saw her daddy. Her daddy got Mama pregnant and went off to the war, and while he was in the war, he died. So my mom was without a father at 2, and in came to my mama's life my papa, and they were together for many, many years, and loved the Lord most of the time. When they weren't in church all the time, they were drunk as skunk. It was kind of a weird dynamic. I was raised by my mother was raised by alcoholics. My father was raised by alcoholics. And so Mama and Papa, man, they'd sing the church songs and love the things of God, and then they would just get drunk for a while, to the point where my mother was raised by her grandmother, my great-grandmother. So my mother was raised by her great-grandmother. Mama and Papa were in church, and they'd be out of church, and all that kind of stuff. So here I come along, and we're together for 25 years. My sisters and I come along, and then my mom separates, leaves my dad. And so let's just say I got a little fun in the dysfunctional family. Not like some of you. Some of you have much worse stories, more horrible stories. But I do understand that some of us have twisted trees. We don't come from, godly mom, godly dad, godly grandma. Now, I'm married into a family, by the way, godly grandpa, godly mom, godly dad, just totally different. By the way, that was very challenging in our early days of marriage, because she has a strong picture of marriage, and I have this totally dysfunctional picture of marriage. So that was a challenge when we first got married some 24 years ago. So I'm just saying, I a little bit understand if you have some weird dynamics. I have stepmom. My dad's been married to my stepmom for almost 30 years now, probably 26, 27, 28 years. And my mom's been married She'd been married twice. Her last husband actually passed away, and then there's been numbers of whatever they are now. But kind of get it. And then I pastored for 21 years, so I really understand a lot of stuff. So I want to show you just this thought the Lord gave me a couple of weeks ago, and I want to run it down. If you don't know who these people are, let me explain. We mentioned verses 3 and verse 5 and 6 to you. Tamar married Judah's son. Judah's son was Tamar's husband. Judah died. Tamar's husband died, so Judah said, I'll give you a boy. And but the next son, because if you know the way this works, if you have a husband that dies, you would then marry his brother. Then you'd marry his brother. And it was to keep the seed or the line alive. It's kind of interesting. I'm glad we don't do that anymore. But the husband died, and the husband had a brother, and so she married him, and he died. And Judah said, look, when my youngest boy gets old enough, I'll let you marry him, but he's not quite old enough now, so give it time. Well, time passed. And when the boy got old enough to marry, Judah didn't let him marry Tamar. So Tamar goes to where Judah, I'm just going to give you this overview. You need to study it out for yourself. Tamar goes to where Judah is out of town on a business trip. He's going to check out his flocks. And she knows that he's out of town, so she goes to where the ladies of the night are, and she sets herself up as open for business as a prostitute. Well, Judah, his wife had died. He's kind of lonely. He's on a business trip. Not to make it right, but it's what happened. Well, he sees this prostitute. And again, remember the idea. She's veiled and covered and all those things. So he goes to her, and a long story short, he impregnates her. Well, when Judah finds out that his daughter-in-law is pregnant, he's going to kill her, because that was the biblical way. They're going to put her to death for her indiscretion. And then because of some things that he had given her, bracelets and different things, she proves to him that he is the father of this child that's going to be born. This child is Pharez. Pharez, very important name in Jewish history, by the way, a whole nother study there, but they blessed the name of Pharez. So Tamar is impregnated by her father-in-law at the prostitute. Everybody got the picture? Father-in-law, now that just twisted and gross to me, but father-in-law is the daddy as she plays the prostitute. That's who Tamar is, all right? So then you go to the next one we talked about just quickly. You go to Rahab. And again, the New Testament spellings of some of these, but that R-A-C-H-A-B, that's Rahab. And we know her story. Everybody knows her story. She's Rahab the... I mean, that's kind of like, if you want to be known for the rest of your life for one issue in your past, we always say that. I would like to just remind you, she was a great woman of faith, but she was a harlot. Everybody knows what a harlot is. This is adult conference, all right? She was a harlot. She took money from guys to have sex. So Rahab is a harlot. So we got Tamar, she's a what? Prostitute, harlot. Now we got Rahab. She's a harlot. By the way, she wasn't a Jew. Then we come down the line, and we've got the next one. Who's she? It's in your notes. Who's she? Ruth. What's Ruth? She's a Moabitess. If you know anything about Moab and Israel, they don't get along. Okay, they're same tree, but a certain split. And so you got a Moabitess, Ruth, and you know that great story. She tells Naomi, I'm going to go with you. Your God will be my God, your people my people, all those things. But great story. Book of Ruth, one of my favorite books in all the Bible. And, of course, Boaz comes along and marries her, and it's a great story. But now Ruth, she wasn't raised in church. She wasn't around the things of God. She's what we would call a first-generation Christian. You know what a first-generation Christian is? That's the first person in her family to come to faith in Christ. So all her family, in fact, remember Orpah made the big decision to go back to her kinsman. Ruth made the decision to leave her kinsman and be with Naomi, be with the people of Israel, be the people of God, and to follow God. So Ruth is a first-generation Christian. She's standing all by herself. I was talking to Brother Anderson last night, one of the young men from his church is here, and he's the only person in his entire family, generations, that's a believer. So he's standing by himself when the mom, dad, brothers, sisters, everybody else, complete, total, by himself Christian. So you got Ruth. She's a Moabite. She doesn't know anything about church. She doesn't know anything about God. She's learning things. And so Bathsheba's bathing. David sees her. David takes her. There's a relationship. She's pregnant. David tries to cover his sin, kills a good man, has a good man murdered. So now Bathsheba's part of adultery and a murder cover-up, right? And you just kind of keep going down the line, and here comes who? Jesus. So you're not the only person in history that has a twisted family tree. Everybody here has some kind of story. I'm telling you, if you're in this room, there's a reason you have desire to be here, and it's because you think, man, preacher, nobody knows what I'm going through. It's kind of interesting. Jesus knows kind of what you're going through, because he looks back at his family tree. We have a joke in our family. We don't want to do genealogies because we don't want to know. We know enough to know we don't want to know. People, oh, my grandfather was one of the princes in Europe. My grandfather probably was one of the drunkards of Europe, so we're not interested in knowing the details of who that was or how we got here or why we got here. But we know this. Every one of you has a story. I have a story. I don't know if we could probably do this. Jake, you come up here and just start teaching, and Jake's story is identical to mine, raised in a preacher's home. His only variance is it was the dad, not the mom, that made the decision. Jake's got the same identical story I have. Brother Cubis could come up here and tell you his story. It's a challenging story. Brother Redford, our dear friend who pastors the New Life Baptist Church, who's leading the conference, identical story to Jake and my story. I mean, it's just interesting. You look around you and you think, I'm the only one that has a real dysfunctional family, or I'm the only one that's gone through dysfunctional issues. Or here's the truth. Most of us have an issue when it comes to something in our families. We're blended. We're divorced. We have stepbrothers, stepsisters. In my family, my wife and I have chosen to adopt. So we have a weird dynamic now because we have our bio children that we love dearly. We have our adopted children that we love dearly. But watch this. In the last adoption, the one we're actually currently in the middle of, we now have a brand new part of our family that is, if you want to say it like this, my baby, my daughter, her biological grandpa owns and runs a tattoo parlor. So they come to visit, and we love them dearly, and they're just an extended part of our family. But they're Roman Catholic. They don't go to church like we do. They don't think like we do. We love them passionately, but we've added to our family a whole new world of Maya's side of the family that we're going to have a relationship with. So, man, when we get together, it's kind of weird. Here's the independent Baptist preacher, and here's the people that are tattooed and Catholic and all this, and hey, it's just, watch this, family. And in your case, you may be here at this conference thinking, man, I want to love the Lord. I want to make some good decisions. But you know what? You're going to go back to some really challenging family dynamics because mom and dad aren't in, brothers and sisters aren't in, wife, husband, whatever it may be. I'll give you 4 thoughts. The Lord actually gave this to me on a whole nother thought process a few weeks ago. My son was preaching out of this passage, and he went in another direction. But I want to give you 4 thoughts the Lord gave me. Number 1, what your parents have done does not determine what you will do. So here's what kept me from surrendering my life to Christ some 20-some-odd years ago. If mom and dad couldn't make it, I'm not even going to try. And that was my excuse to God. Because, see, I was called to preach at 9 years old in my office. If you come to my office, have a note on the wall to Dr. Bob Gray of Jacksonville, Florida. Said, Dear Dr. Gray, while you were preaching today, God called me to preach. 9 years old. Well, here I am, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, running from God, reprobate, alcoholic, all those things, because obviously I told you my history of alcoholism with the family, and it was an easy out for me. So here I'm an alcoholic, running from God, got out of the military, a complete shot drunk. I've got pictures I show people every now and then, the long ponytail, the Egyptian earring. I made the mullet cool, just so you know. But I mean, it was just my excuse. And so God would deal with me, and he would say, you know, I've called you to preach, I've called you to service. You're a Christian, you know better than all this lifestyle you're living, all these things. And I would always say, look, if mom and dad didn't make it, I'm not going to make it. In fact, here's what happened. When I surrendered, and it was kind of a funny thing, Tony Hudson was preaching a message, God dealt with my heart, and a long process, but that day, by the end of the day, I'd completely given my life to the Lord, except for this. I said, now, Lord, I will serve you with all my life, but I still won't be a preacher. Here's what I was going to do. I love sports. I played college football. I played basketball. I played soccer. If you have a sport, listen, I like watching curling on TV. Okay? I mean, I love sports. So I said to God, God, I will be a Christian school teacher. I will coach boys and girls in sports. I was a basketball coach at Tennessee University. That's how I paid my way through school. I will coach. I will be a youth pastor. I will drive a church bus. I will do anything in your work but preach. Because, see, if mom and dad blew out, I'm going to blow out. Because if mom and dad couldn't hold their marriage together, I won't be able to hold a marriage together. If mom and dad couldn't make it, I won't make it. So I was helping God. God, I don't want to embarrass you, so I'm not even going to try. I'm just going to, because here's my thinking. Christian school teachers blow out, not near as big a deal as preachers blowing out. Christian school teachers blow out, it's bad, but it's not like preacher. Because when preachers blow out. So I said, God, I'll be a teacher. So my wife and I get married, and I'm an education major, and I'm coaching basketball, and I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to do. Except our first year of marriage, I was miserable because God hadn't called me to teach. I love teachers. I love teaching. I love coaching. I love all that. But God called me to preach. So the first year of our marriage, we were having marriage problems, and it wasn't because of my wife and I so much. It was because God and I and my father-in-law, who's a wonderful preacher, looked at me one day and said, Brent, if God's called you to preach, you'll never be happy doing anything else. But my excuse was mom and dad. Watch me now. What mom and dad did does not determine what you will do. And the second great part of my surrender was not just, God, I want to serve you, but God, I want to serve you completely. Regardless of what and I had to come to the place, I'm not my daddy. I look like him, I talk like him, I'm built like him, but I'm not him. And Valerie's not my mom. And their decisions did not necessarily determine my decisions. And you know what? One more anniversary, and my wife and I will be married as long as my mom and dad were. That's how funny life is. I'm not bound to repeat the mistakes of my parents. Watch me. You say, my mom and dad, their marriage, you're not bound to make that your life. Their history does not have to be your history. We just read that Joseph, he is that good, we didn't read it, but right before the verse we did read, Joseph is that good man that is in the line we read, and he goes ahead and says to Mary, I'm going to marry you anyway, regardless of what I think has happened, because of course the Lord spoke to him, and he made a decision. I'm not going to act like my forefathers. I'm going to do right. So the first thought I give you is this. Just because you come from dysfunction does not mean you're bound and determined to duplicate that. You're not going to be what your mom and dad are unless you choose this for yourself. It's not chosen for you. Number two, I wrote this down. What some of you have done does not determine what you can do or what you will do. Preacher, I'm here. I've already blown it. That was the second great thing that God had to help me about. So, first of all, I'm not my mom and dad. Second of all, I've ruined my life. I remember my repentance prayer to God. I was in a barn, by the way. So God dealt with me in a service, but I wouldn't go forward because I was so wrestling with God. I said, and the devil helped me with the answers I needed. If you go forward, everybody will think you're going forward just to kind of impress your parent, your dad and stepmom. So don't go forward. Just do it later. And so I won the battle. I didn't go forward in that service. And I'm on my way back to Atlanta from Murfreesboro, and Tony was living out on Rucker Lane, and my sister, who is a bigger reprobate as I am, she said, what's wrong with you? I said, man, I should have got right with God. We're driving. She's driving a Jeep Cherokee. She's driving. I'm in the passenger seat. She said, what's wrong with you? I said, man, I should have got right with God this morning. God dealt with me. I'm a mess. And she said, my reprobate sister, she said, you need to go talk to Tony, our pastor, the pastor. And I said, no, we got to get home to Atlanta. It's a 4-hour drive. You need to get home to your husband. We got to go to work tomorrow. Let's just get on the road. We're on 96 Highway going west out toward Franklin. We're about to get on 24 going east toward Chattanooga. And she made this statement, I'll forever be indebted to my sister. She said, I'm not right with God, but I'm not going to keep you from being right with God. My sister jumped a curb, got us out of the turn lane, back on the 96 Highway. She drove me to the pastor's house. I got out, went in the barn where Tony was saddling a horse, And for the next 2 hours, I just began to weep and bawl, and we walked through repentance and me getting right with God. And here's what I remember praying. Lord, you don't even want me, because I've been given so many gifts and so many blessings, and I've wrecked my life. I mean, I've got scars to this day because of decisions I made when I was 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. And I said, God, you don't even want me. But I remember praying this: I have nowhere else to go. And I remember telling God, you've got me whether you want me or not. And I didn't understand how much he wanted me at that time. I didn't understand how much he was willing to forgive me and wanted to forgive me. I just remember I ain't got nowhere else to turn. And when I was 16 years old, my daddy bought me a car, a 1981 Ford Escort. Trivia question: the first year the Ford Escort came out, 1981. Go back in history. Ford Escort, 1981. Piece of garbage. Okay, trashy car. By the way, just for perspective, my sister turned 16 6 years before me, 1978. I turned in 84, 1978. My sister turned 16. My father bought her, by the way, used 1981 Ford Escort. My sister turned 16, 1978. Brand new, less than 10 miles off the lot. Pontiac, Trans Am, T-top, Smokey and the Bandit edition. If you don't know what that is, look it up. Brand new car. I'm still bitter. Ford Escort. So I drove that car for a little while. Ended up absolutely destroying that car. Took transmit, everything. I remember limping that car in one day and said, Daddy, it's broke. And he said, it's not worth the money to fix it. I remember praying and begging God for forgiveness. And I remember thinking, I'm not worth fixing. Because see, I was raised in church. You name a preacher of fundamentalism in the past, I've heard him. Listen to this. I've had dinner with him. I sat where my daddy is. We've sat with Brother Howell. I've sat with my daddy. We've sat with Brother. I've been in Dr. Rice's house more than I can think. John Rice. These names are not important to many of you, but I've sat in Dr. Rice's house. Mrs. Rice I've got notes from her as a child. I mean, I've sat with some of the great names of our past, and here I am, a drunken reprobate. I remember thinking, God, you don't want me. I've lived, I've done. Look at all this stuff. What you've done up to now does not limit you like you think it does. I remember several years ago, as I'm preaching in Texas. I lived in Texas, obviously, I was preaching there. And I remember going through the mall one day, and there was a teenager that had a shirt on that said 18 and bored. 18 and bored. You know what the number one killer of young people is in our society? It's suicide. We are seeing suicide among young people at a record rate. You know why? Because so many of you think, I've already blown it. Let me help you. This it may help you. You have not even begun to blow it yet. There are so many more things you're going to screw up in life. There are so many mistakes you've yet to make. Give yourself time. You'll make a lot of mistakes down the road. Preacher, but I've lost my virginity. Preacher, I've had a baby out of wedlock. Preacher, I've been in drug abuse. Preacher, what you have done does not determine what you will do. I wanted to take time this morning and go through the life of some of these guys in the line of Jesus. Anybody murdered anybody? Because God still used David. Anybody a complete and habitual liar? Because God still used Abraham and Isaac, and they were terrible liars. They lied about their wife. And by the way, not just about their wife, they were willing to give their wife to strange men. They were such liars. Any of you just deceitful and dishonest? I mean, just crooked as a snake? Oh, Jacob, man, he was a terrible guy. By the way, we're walking through the line of Jesus. What you have done does not limit you of what you can do. Number 3, I wrote this down. What you will do does not guarantee what others around you will do. Preacher, you know, I want to get right, but what about my brother, my sister, my best friend, my boyfriend, my girlfriend, my husband, my wife? Perfect world, man. Revival comes to you, and all of a sudden it spreads around your whole circle. Out of this whole line of Christ here, you start looking at people, Didn't Ruth make this incredibly strong, powerful decision, and yet her sister-in-law said no? You realize we could be talking about Moab, we could be talking about two Moabitess women, we could be talking about Orpah and Ruth, but we're only talking about Ruth because Orpah said, I'm going to go back to what's comfortable. You know how many times I've preached and I've watched teenage boys or young men. I've watched married couples, to be honest. I've watched everybody. And I've watched a guy that, man, have you ever seen somebody just under conviction, and I've watched them as they're just so ready to make a decision. I've watched them look to their left because of a wife, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a best friend. They wouldn't go for it. My best friend growing up, and for some reason lately I've been really nostalgic. I don't know why, but I've been really nostalgic. My best friend growing up was a boy named Glenn Ford. We were best friends from 4th grade. We're still dear friends. Time and distance, we're not close like we used to be, but I love him to death. Glenn and I were best friends, 4th grade all the way through. I was saved. Love the Lord? Nah, not really, but I was saved. Serve the Lord? Not really, but I was saved. Doing right? No, but I was saved. Glenn's mom worked at the Sword of the Lord. My parents worked at the Sword of the Lord. Glenn was in the same Christian school I was. Glenn went to the same church I went to, same youth group. We played on the same basketball teams. We traveled. Inseparable. My junior year, his senior year, Glenn called me on the phone one day and he said, guess what just happened to me? I said, what? He said, I got saved this morning. I thought if you went to Christian school, you were saved. Now, I've learned since then, just because you live in a garage doesn't make you a car. So you can go to Christian school, you can go to church, you can do a lot of spiritual things, not saved. It never dawned on me one time in all those years of elementary school and high school that my best friend could have been lost. Never dawned on me. I wish I could go back now, and I could give you 35 more stories of my friends, some being out of school now for 30 years, I can tell you incredible stories. But I could not control him. I could only control me. Now, I wish I would have made a decision. Maybe that influenced him. But I'm going to tell you this. I wish he would have made a decision long before he did. But so much of what we worry about is, if I make this decision, what is so-and-so going to do? Can't tell you. I'd like to tell you because you make a decision that will influence them for the positive, and it will to some degree, but I promise you this, it may not. You may be the only one in your group or your family or your friend sphere that makes good decisions, and you may make a decision. I remember when I made some decisions after this surrender in my life. My best friends, guys that I'd graduated high school from, guys that I'd partied like crazy because I was stationed in Panama City Beach, Florida. It was only a 4.5-hour drive from my hometown of Atlanta, so I had friends come down every weekend because I lived on the beach and we had club passes and we just whatever. And I remember when I got right with God, I was the only one of that group. And years later, my best friend Ronald, from that time frame, he called me and he said, are you a preacher? And I said, yeah. He said, what kind of church? It was Baptist church, independent Baptist, the whole thing. He said, have you quit drinking? I said, yeah, it's kind of a rule. As a Baptist preacher, you got to quit drinking. He said, how? He said, I can't. By the way, that was 15, 20 years after I'd quit, after we'd walked away. He's still in the same lifestyle. By the way, I hope he's doing better now. He's in church, he's doing better now. I love him to death. But 15, 20 years after I'd walked away, he's still in the same cycle. You can't determine what others around you are going to do. Here's the last thought. Doesn't matter what your parents have done. Doesn't matter what you have done. It doesn't matter what your friends have done. It really only matters what you do. Say, but preacher, you don't know my family. Look at Jesus' family. Look at Joseph's family. Preacher, you don't know what I've done. Man, look at Joseph's family. Look at Jesus' family. Preacher, I'm the only one. Yeah, look at Jesus' family. Look at Joseph's family. At some point, everybody in that line had to decide, I'm going to do right. I'm going to make decisions. It's almost a little bit easy for us to say, well, I'm not going to serve God because of, and then we fill in the blank. Mom and dad blew it. I'm the son of a drunkard. Man, I've been known as, whatever, fill in the blank. My past. Man, even this week I've made decisions. You know that the only thing that you can control is what you decide to do now. Old people, Christians, pastors, we're so concerned Old pastors, what are the young people going to do? Young preachers, young pastors, they're concerned with what the old people used to do. How about this? We just be concerned with what we can do right now. I love Acts. I wrote it in your notes there. David served his own generation well. And then he died. Oh, but David's sons, David couldn't control his sons. David followed Saul. David couldn't fix Saul. David tried to help Saul. Saul wouldn't listen. Well, Saul was bad and his sons were bad. I know, but David served his own generation. He did what he could do. Your responsibility, whether you come from a absolutely dysfunctional mess, and some of you do, I've talked to you, whether you yourself, and again, I love what Jake said this morning, some of your stories of abuse, neglect, abandonment, we'll never understand those. We'll never get it. And I hurt for you. I wish I could make it better for you. You got a story, but it doesn't have to be your history. It doesn't have to be you. You can say, by the grace of God, I'll be the one in my family. I'll be the one in my peer group. I'll be the one that stands and does and chooses. Preacher, where do I start? Man, you start where we started this morning. Just get along with God. Say, God, by your grace. Then there's practical things. There's just practical things. You get in church. You stay in church. You get in a peer group. That's what helps our church so much is we have so many young adults that are supportive to each other. Get around, but don't pull off by yourself. I watch during conference. If I find people sitting by themselves and drifting apart, I want to go bring them into the group. Because there's something about accountability. What John did this morning with the invitation, tremendous. What we're trying to do at night with the discipleship groups, tremendous. Brother Michael's thought on that. Just getting you accountable and getting you around people. Because when you get left alone, man, your mind starts wandering and the devil starts telling you how your past is such a mess and how your decisions are such a mess and God can't use you. And then you get around other people and say, yeah, God can use me and I'm where you are. And God did this for me. And God did what we said this morning, focus on the victory, not the valley. What God can do. So many of us have got stories. I wish I could take time, and I won't do it, because if you have a question, write it down, please. And if you have wrote it down, we'll pick it up. If you don't have a question, we'll be done early and go drink coffee and go spy on the other sessions. But I wish I could tell you the history of great preachers. And I'll just throw out a couple. Just throw out a couple. Brother Howes, many of us, some of you don't know Brother Howes, but many of us know Brother Howes. Brother Howes, drunkard father. Brother Sexton, drunkard father. I could just start going down the name of men who influenced me for Christ. Brother Chapel, busted preacher's home. I could just start telling you people in our church. I used to have a piano player in Texas and played beautifully. And I would tell young mothers who were trying to be single moms, I'd be like, you need to go talk to Miss Anna. And Anna and Shelley had been married 30 years, and they'd say, Anna doesn't understand what I'm going through. Well, she was in her 50s at that time. And I'd say, no, you need to go talk to Miss Anna, because before she married Brother Shelley, she was that young single mom with 2 kids and a husband that had separated and all those things. You say, well, she's been married 30 years and been the church pianist 30 years and one of the finest Christian ladies. Yeah, but she was that broken home. And you start thinking, man, so-and-so's got it figured out, and so-and-so's got it figured out, and so-and-so's got it figured out. Truth is, more people than you will ever realize until you get older and look back and see behind the scenes a little bit come from some of the most screwed up, absolutely dysfunctional messes. It doesn't determine who you are. Here's what I've done. You know why we do this conference? Because I was 18, 19, 20, 21. My Aunt Teresa said, you're a tweener. You're in between childhood and adulthood. And she said, it's hard. It's hard. I was telling the guys this morning, I love the conference because I'm an old man now, and I readily accept the fact that Jake can call me grandpa. But a child. I forget. Been married 24 years. I got 6 kids. I've been pastoring 21 years. I forget what it's like to try to navigate your hormones and your issues. I still have hormones and issues, trust me, but it's a whole different level of crazy stupid. And I get around you guys and I remember those days. Oh, God can't use me. You know that God specializes in taking messes, making masterpieces out of them? That's when God gets glory. If everybody comes out, well, I had a godly grandma, and I had a godly grandpa, and I had a godly mom, and I had a godly dad, and we were raised in church, and I've never done any of those things. That's great, and that's the testimony we want our kids to have. That's the testimony we want everybody to have. That's a Samuel testimony. But you know that Samuel's sons didn't have that testimony? Samuel, man, we all talk about the Samuel testimony. Read 1 Samuel chapter 8. Samuel's sons, they didn't walk with God. They were bad guys. So just because you have that good testimony doesn't mean you're going to turn out good. Just because you have that bad testimony doesn't mean you're going to turn out bad. What it is, it's individual decisions. It's individual choices. And if you let the devil beat you with your past, listen, tell the devil, you're not going to beat me with my past, because I'm going to write my own future. I'm going to let God write my own future. And that future is going to be, I'm going to choose right. Just because mom and dad did this, just because brother and sister did this, just because the generations, man, break those chains. I had a guy tell me one time, and I'm done, I may not have broke the chain, but I hopefully weakened it enough for my boys to break it. Now that's a good thought. Say, preacher, I got so much stuff. Listen, if you don't think you break it, at least weaken it so those kids of yours will have a chance. So those that come behind you will see what God's done in your life. Your tree may be twisted, but I had this thought. I almost named the session this. Twisted trees produce the best fruit. Twisted trees, man. When you're able to brag on Jesus and talk about how God has just lifted you and changed you and radically impacted you. Well, you Christian people, oh, you don't know my story. I was raised in a drunkard's home. Oh, you don't know my story. Man, I look up in our choir on Sunday, and literally I see drug addicts and former lesbians, and I see prostitutes, and I just see the grace of God. Because what they were doesn't determine who they are. Because God, his own family tree, pretty twisted. You know why God, listen, 4 women named. You know why? Because God's showing us how much he identifies with us. He didn't have to put that heritage in there, that ancestry. But he did, because he doesn't want any of you to say, well, you don't know my story. You don't know Jesus' story. That's his family. Harlots, prostitutes, liars, thieves. God can do anything. God can do anything. You're looking at a young man that had to learn, you know what? Just because mom and dad made some mistakes. Just because some bad genes, if you want to say that. And don't blame it on, well, it's just who I am. No. It's who you choose to be. Because if you let him, God can make you who he wants you to be. And that's in his identity. Anybody got any questions you want to turn in? If you want to ask it, you can ask it. If not, you want questions, you turn in. If you want to talk to me or Brother Jake afterward, we'd be glad to sit down and talk to any of you. Brother Cubas is back there. Maybe some of you don't know Brother John. Brother Redford is back there. My wife, Miss Julie. So during the week, if you have specific questions, you're certainly welcome. Anybody got any questions? Anything you want to turn in? Anything you want to do? At all? Okay. I'm going to pray and we're going to go. Redford, lift your voice. That's Lord to bless. I asked Jonathan to pray on purpose because that gives me permission to tell my story now. Jonathan was 15 years old. His mom began to date by internet a man in my church. Jonathan's from Paducah, Kentucky. And they began to date on the internet and started going back and forth, seeing each other. And finally, I flew up to Paducah and I married Jonathan's mother and a man named Tom Parrish. And they moved to our town. We were doing a roof. Was it my roof, Jonathan? We're working on my roof after storm or something, I don't remember. And Jonathan's up on that roof, and 15 years old, and he's sitting there and he's telling me the story. And Jonathan's dad was a preacher. Jonathan's mom and dad were ministering, and Dad, I love him, he's a good man, but made some decisions and left his wife and broke the home up. Jonathan's got 2 brothers and 2 sisters, 5 of them. Jonathan's the oldest, all the way down to Andy and Austin. And we're on this. This is the story Jonathan tells me. I don't remember saying this, but Jonathan tells me I said this. But Jonathan's pouring out his story about how terrible life is and about how his dad left and struggled, and it was terrible. But Mom, can you imagine being a single mom, 5 kids? And he's just pouring out his heart to me. I'm a new pastor. We're getting to know each other. And Jonathan says, I looked at him and I said, that's terrible. So what are you going to do about it? And Jonathan tells the story so much better than I could. I should have him tell it. But Jonathan said, I was thinking compassion and pity and all those things. And I am terribly compassionate. In fact, I love Jonathan like a son. But all of us have got bad deals. So I'm going to ask you the same question I asked the preacher of New Life Baptist Church, my son in the ministry, who's married to a beautiful young lady and doing a great work for God. Got your story. I hate it for you. But what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? Because it's up to you. It's up to you. All right, get to your next session. I love you. If you have any question, you can come see me, Miss Julie, Miss Valerie, Jonathan, John, whoever. You're dismissed.